The house smells like carnations. For the third week, I couldn't get rid of the smell. The funeral flowers seemed to have soaked even the walls. I stand in the kitchen, staring out the window at the bare branches of the apple trees and thinking that Leroy never lived to see the new harvest. 43 years together ended one February night when his heart simply stopped. Next to me on the table is an album of photos I never put away after the funeral. I'm still not used to talking about him in the past tense. Leroy loved, Leroy did, Leroy wanted. My tongue stumbles every time I have to say those words out loud. The kettle on the stove begins to whistle, and the sound brings me back to reality. I need to make tea, take my pills, and try to somehow get through another day. Another day without Leroy in a house that isn't really mine anymore. I set the cup back on the windowsill and stare at the document still lying on the kitchen table. The deed of gift. 3 weeks ago, on the day of the funeral, I signed that document with a trembling hand. Troy stood over me, repeating that it had to be done immediately. "Mom, it's for taxes," he said, as my gaze wandered over the paper. "It's just a formality. The house will be in my name, but you'll continue to live here as usual, of course. It'll be easier for everyone." I remember the notary, a short man with a shiny bald spot, shuffling awkwardly from foot to foot in our living room. Many of the guests hadn't left yet, and Troy was already dragging me to sign the papers. "Mrs. Stubbins, are you sure you want to do this today?" the notary asked, and I could see the doubt in his eyes. "She's sure," Troy answered for me, squeezing my shoulder. "We discussed it a long time ago. Dad would have approved. Leroy wouldn't have approved. But I was too broken to argue, too exhausted to ask questions. So I signed, barely glancing at the contents. Footsteps on the porch snap me out of my memories. The door opens without a knock, and Cheryl, Troy's second wife, enters the kitchen. She's wearing skinny jeans, a beige cashmere sweater, and so much gold on her arms that it's clear she's not here to dig a vegetable garden. In the 2 years we've known each other, I've never seen her without makeup. I always wonder what it's like to be the kind of woman who even goes out to get the mail with her lips painted. "Winnie, do you mind?" She walks past me, holding a roll of floral wallpaper. "We thought the nursery needed a little freshening up. After all, Paige is 12 now, and it's still got those awful blue walls." The nursery. She's talking about the room where Troy and Laurel grew up, where they kept boxes of their baby clothes, school books, and homemade crafts. "I thought Paige and Marshall would only be here this weekend," I reply, trying to hide my annoyance. "Change of plans." Cheryl sets the roll against the wall and looks around the kitchen with a critical eye. "These curtains, Vinny, they look so vintage, and not in a good way. I saw some great curtains at the new store on Maple Street. They'd be perfect here. My mother made them 50 years ago. Leroy always said they made the kitchen cozy." I swallow a lump in my throat and turn away from the window. "Do as you see fit," I say, feeling a part of me die with those words. "That's great." Cheryl claps her hands together. "By the way, could you move all those boxes out of the garage? Troy wants to put his motorcycle in there." The boxes she's talking about contain Leroy's tools, his collection of old vinyl records, and fishing gear. Things he's collected his whole life. Things I'm not ready to touch yet. "I'll get to it next week," I reply, knowing I'm putting off the inevitable. Great. Cheryl has already pulled out her phone and is typing something quickly. "Also, I've noticed that your bedroom is too big for one person. Maybe it would make sense for you to move into the small room next to the bathroom. Then Marshall could—" "No," I interrupt, surprised at the firmness in my voice. "I'll stay in my room with Leroy." Cheryl presses her lips together, but doesn't say anything. Her phone rings, and she walks out into the living room to answer it. I hear her discussing the delivery of new furniture with someone. furniture for my house that I wasn't even asked about. An hour later, the grandchildren arrive. 15-year-old Marshall walks by with barely a nod, completely absorbed in his phone. Paige at least says hello, but immediately runs upstairs, where Cheryl is already showing her samples of the new wallpaper. I stand in the hallway, feeling like a ghost in my own house. I think back to when these kids were little, when Troy and his first wife Denise used to bring them over for the weekend. Back then, Marshall would enthusiastically help Grandpa fix the old lawnmower, and Paige would pick berries with me in the backyard. What changed? When did they start looking at me as a servant? Or worse, as an unavoidable inconvenience? Upstairs, I can hear Paige's laughter and Cheryl's voice. Can you believe your grandmother has been keeping old newspapers in here for 10 years? It's a breeding ground for dust. Old newspapers. Leroy collected clippings with all the important events of the town. Our personal chronicle of Rylands, he used to say. Now it's just a breeding ground for dust. In the evening, as I finish making dinner, Troy arrives. Tall like his father, but skinnier, with the perpetually restless look of a man always looking for an opportunity. It's the kind of look a gambler gets when he's always looking for the card that will turn the game in his favor. Hi, Mom. He kisses my cheek, and I can smell his expensive cologne. How's it going? Has Cheryl shown you the changes we're planning yet? She did, I answer, stirring the soup. I don't think we need to redecorate, Troy. The house is in good shape. Mom, he leaned against the kitchen counter and looked at me with the same condescending smile I remembered from when he was a teenager. You're living in the last century. This house needs a modern look. You've seen the real estate prices these days, haven't you? If you do it right, you could sell it. I'm asking you sharply. You want to sell the house my father and I built with our own hands? Troy raises his hands in a protective gesture. No one's talking about selling, Mom. I'm just thinking ahead. But while we're on the subject of business, he pulls a folded piece of paper from his inside jacket pocket. Something about the way he moves reminds me of a magician pulling a card out of his sleeve. What is it? I ask, feeling suddenly anxious. Just a formality. He unfolds the paper on the table. You see, the bank requires everything to be official. Since the house is legally mine now, they want to see that the relationship between us is on a business basis. I stare at the document, and the lines swim before my eyes. Rent? My voice sounds muffled, like it's coming from far away. You want me to pay to live in my own house? Technically, it's not your house anymore, Mom. Troy points to a line in the document. But I'm asking for a nominal amount. $520 a month isn't even market value. It's just a formality for the bank. $520, that's almost half my pension. Troy, I don't understand. When we talked about the deed of gift, you said nothing would change, that I'd live here just like before. And you will. He smiles broadly, but his eyes remain cold. It'll just be legal now. It's official. It's by the book. I look at my son and I don't recognize him. Or maybe I'm finally seeing the real him. I remember when he was 12 years old, selling a classmate his bicycle that Leroy and I had given him for his birthday. When we asked why, he said, "There's a net profit in it, Dad. I got it for free, and I sold it for $30. Leroy then shook his head. Son, not everything in this life is measured in money. I guess that lesson was never learned. What if I refuse to pay? I asked, surprised at my own audacity. Troy's smile becomes strained. Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. We're family. Of course I'm not putting you out on the street. He pauses. But legally, as the owner of the property, I have the right to demand compensation for living expenses or… He doesn't finish the sentence, but I don't need to hear the ending. The threat is clear. Let me think about it, I say. turning away from the stove. Sure, Mom. His voice becomes carefree again. Dinner smells great. I hope you made your famous apple pie. I nod, though my appetite is completely gone. Troy claps me on the shoulder and heads upstairs, where his family is waiting for him. His family at my house, which is now his. Donna's Cafe is the only place where you can get a decent coffee without becoming the centerpiece of the town gossip, at least not right away. I sit at the window, nervously tapping my fingers on the gift card I brought with me. Judy, a waitress who's been working here since the dinosaurs, puts a cup in front of me. You look like you need something stronger than coffee, Winnie, she says, glancing at the paperwork. I wish, I reply with a wry smile. I'm waiting for Otis. Has he shown up yet? Judy shakes her head and moves to another table. Otis Pell is a former court clerk who knows more about legal documents in our county than anyone else. We met years ago when I worked as a mailman and brought him the paper every day. Otis disliked mailboxes and always waited for me on the porch with a cup of hot chocolate on cold days. After his wife died, our conversations grew longer and our friendship stronger. The doorbell rings, and Otis enters the cafe, a slouching man of 73 with bushy gray eyebrows and a keen eye. He notices me at once and, with a nod to Judy, heads toward my table. Vinny, he sits down across from me, still wearing his tweed jacket. It's good to see you, although, judging by the look on your face, it's not a pleasant occasion. I push the gift card across the table. I need your help, Otis. Troy is charging me rent on my own house, $520 a month. Otis whistles, takes the document, and puts on the glasses hanging on a chain around his neck. I heard you signed the deed of gift. Honestly, I was surprised. Leroy always said he wanted you to keep the house. It was right after the funeral. I felt a lump come up in my throat. Troy insisted, talking about taxes, about how it was best for everyone. I was, out of it. Otis frowns, flipping through the pages. The day of the funeral, you say? He looks up. Vinny, did you know that signing such documents under emotional stress can be grounds for a challenge? Really? Pressure, coercion, taking advantage of an emotional state are all valid reasons. Otis continues to study the document. That's odd. Usually these deeds of gift usually include a lifetime right of residence for the donor. It's in here, but with conditions. What kind of conditions? The fine print says you have the right to stay for free as long as you don't interfere with the owner's economic activities related to the property. Very unusual wording. I can feel my back getting cold. That's what Troy was referring to when he brought me the lease. What does that mean, Otis? He takes off his glasses and wipes them with a handkerchief. It means, Vinny, that your son has been preparing the ground in advance. The question is, for what? What kind of economic activity could be involved with an apartment building on the outskirts of Rylands? Judy brings coffee for Otis. He thanks her with a nod and continues. Have there been any strange visitors lately? Maybe someone has been inquiring about your property? I hesitate. My gaze wanders wordlessly around the cafe, and suddenly I notice a man sitting in the far corner. Something about him seems familiar. Vinny? Otis's voice brings me back to the conversation. I'm sorry. I look at my friend again. I think I've seen that man before. Over there, in the corner. Otis turns around blankly. Yancey? Garrett Yancey? He raises his eyebrows. He's a hydrogeologist from the State University. We met recently. What's he doing out here in the middle of nowhere? A hydrogeologist? I look at the man again. Now I remember. Oh my God, Otis. He came to visit us about 3 months ago, talking to Leroy in the backyard. I thought it was some co-worker of Troy's from his car dealership. Otis comes up. Wait here, he says, and heads toward Yancey's table. I watch them shake hands. Otis says something, pointing in my direction. Yancey frowns at first, then nods. After a moment, they both approach my table. Mrs. Stubbins, Yancey extends his hand to me. Garrett Yancey, we met at your house in January. My condolences on the loss of your husband. Thank you, I reply, shaking his hand. Have a seat, please. Yancey is a tall man in his 40s with a tanned face and the penetrating eyes of a man accustomed to observation. He sits down next to Otis. Otis says you have some questions about your property? He asks. Dr. Yancey, I begin, you came to visit us shortly before my husband died. Can you tell me what your purpose was? Yancey looks a little puzzled. Didn't your son explain? I was invited to do a preliminary study of the aquifer that runs beneath your property. My son? I can feel my heart starting to beat faster. Not my husband? No, definitely your son. Yancey pulls a clipboard out of his bag and searches for something. Here you go. Email correspondence with Troy Stubbins from last December. He turns the screen around, and I see a chain of emails between Troy and Yancey. The messages are full of technical terms, but the gist is clear. Troy was interested in the possibility of finding water on our property. What does that mean? I ask, though I'm beginning to understand inside. It means that your land is of serious commercial interest. Yancey looks genuinely surprised by my ignorance. It could be bottled and sold as premium mineral water, or sell the development rights to a major corporation. It's a significant asset. Otis is looking at me with concern. Winnie, you didn't know anything about this? I shake my head, feeling the anger growing inside. Leroy mentioned some expert who came to look at our old well, but I don't know the details. He died a week after your visit, Mr. Yancey. I'm sorry, the geologist says sincerely. When I spoke to your husband in the yard, he seemed interested, but not overly excited. To be honest, it seemed to me that he didn't fully understand the commercial value of the find. Or he just wasn't as interested in the money as my son, I add bitterly. Dr. Yancey, Otis intervenes. How valuable could this aquifer be? Yancey shrugs his shoulders. It's hard to say without more research, but based on preliminary data, the potential is very high. We could be talking millions of dollars with the right production and marketing organization. Millions of dollars. Those words ring in my ears. Now I understand why Troy was in such a hurry to get the deed of gift, why he brought a notary right to the funeral, why he put in that weird economic activity clause. Thank you, Dr. Yancey, I say, standing up. You've been very helpful. Yancey looks embarrassed. I hope I didn't cause any problems in your family, Mrs. Stubbins. You didn't cause the problems, I reply, picking up the papers from the table. We walk out of the cafe on a chilly March day. The wind blows last year's leaves down the street. We walk in silence, each immersed in his own thoughts. What are you going to do? Otis finally asks as we approach my house. First, I want to make sure my hunch is right, I answer. I need proof. Be careful. Otis squeezes my shoulder. If your son is really up to something, he might not be happy about your investigation. I nod and look at the house. Troy's car is gone, which means he and his family aren't back yet. I've got time to look. I go inside and head straight for Leroy's office. The room's been untouched since his death. I didn't let Cheryl clean it up. A desk, an old chair, bookshelves, and the filing cabinet where Leroy kept all his important documents. I start methodically going through the drawers. Insurance, taxes, receipts, everything is neatly organized into folders. Leroy was always pedantic about paperwork. In the third drawer, I find a folder labeled Plot. Inside are old house plans, land deeds, and an envelope with the Aqua Systems logo on it. I take out the contents, an official letter on letterhead addressed to Troy Stubbins, dated January 15th, 3 weeks before Leroy's death, the hand with the letter is dropping. Troy negotiated the sale of the water under our lot when Leroy was still alive, when the house and land belonged to us. I sit down in Leroy's chair, feeling weak in my legs. How far had my son gotten? What else was he hiding? I continue my search and find a second letter, dated February 3rd, the day after Leroy's death. It's Troy's reply to the company, in which he confirms his readiness for the deal, but asks to wait until the formalities of ownership are completed. Formalities. That's what he called the transfer of the house that Leroy and I had built with our own hands, that had been the center of our family life for nearly 5 decades. In the corner of the office, I notice a box of old photo albums. For some reason, I'm drawn to it. I take the top album, the one that depicts the first years of the house's construction. Here's Leroy, smiling, with a hammer in his hand. Here's me, young, holding little Troy. Here we are all together against the background of the unfinished porch. Suddenly, an envelope falls out of the album. I open it and find a letter written in Leroy's hand. It's addressed to me and dated January 30th, 3 days before his death. My dear Winnie, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer around. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I didn't want to bother you until I was sure. Troy is doing some shady business connected with our land. I overheard him talking to that geologist. They were talking about water under our property. Big money. Troy doesn't know I know about it. I plan to talk to him, but I want to consult with Otis about the legal side first. Whatever happens, remember, this house is yours. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I love you. Always yours, Leroy. Tears covered his eyes. Leroy knew. He tried to protect me, but he couldn't. And I, in my grief, signed the papers without even thinking about the consequences. I wipe my tears and gather up all the papers I can find. Now I have proof. Troy withheld information from me about the value of the land. He negotiated behind our backs. He took advantage of my grief to get the house and the rights to the aquifer. A silhouette appears in the office doorway. Cheryl. What are you doing? She asks, looking suspiciously at the papers in my hands. Sorting through Leroy's things, I answer calmly, tucking the letters into my pocket. Troy and I were going to make this a playroom for the kids, she says, looking around the office with an appraising eye. Can you get all this stuff boxed up by the weekend? Cheryl leaves, and I sit in Leroy's chair, clutching his latest letter tightly in my hand. A plan of action slowly forms in my head. I am no longer a helpless widow to be manipulated. The next morning, while everyone is still asleep, I leave the house and go to Otis's house. He meets me at the door as if he's been expecting me. You were right, I say, handing him the documents I found. Troy knew about the water. He rushed me through the donation on purpose. Otis studies the papers, shaking his head. Deception, pressure under emotional stress, withholding important information, he lists. Winnie, you have every reason to contest the deed of gift. I want more than that, I say firmly. I want him to realize he can't do this, not even to his own mother. Otis nods slowly. You want to serve an eviction notice? Kick your own son out of the house you gave him? That's exactly what he was going to do to me, wasn't it? I chuckle bitterly. I just want him to feel what it's like. Otis sighs. It's not going to be easy, Vinny, and very painful for everyone. I know, I answer, feeling a resolve I haven't felt in years. But sometimes pain is necessary to get justice. The eviction notice sits on the kitchen table like a loaded gun. I put the document where he's sure to see it, next to his coffee mug. Now I wait, sitting in the living room, pretending to be engrossed in my knitting while my heart pounds like a hunted bird. The front door slams with that distinctive sound I've learned to recognize over the years, the way a door slams when it's opened by someone in a good mood. That's about to change. I hear Troy toss his keys on the nightstand, his footsteps approaching the kitchen. Then silence, thick and viscous as tar. Mom? His voice sounds deceptively calm, but there's a storm brewing. I don't turn around. In the living room, Troy enters, holding the document with two fingers like a dead rat. His face is pale, his cheekbones stained with an angry blush. For the first time, I notice how much he looks like his grandfather, my father, a man with an uncontrollable temper. What kind of circus is this? Troy waves the paper. You think I don't realize this is a bluff? I put my knitting aside and look at my son for the first time in a long time, not through the rose-colored glasses of maternal love, but as a stranger capable of betrayal. Troy, you withheld information from me about the aquifer. You negotiated with corporate behind my back, used my father's death to take over the house. It's not a bluff. You have 30 days. Our words sound like whiplash in the silence of the living room. Troy clutches the paper, his fingers white with tension. There's something in his eyes that I've never seen before, the cold calculation of a cornered predator. You don't know what you're doing, he says, with a contrived calm that's more frightening than shouting. This deal is millions of dollars. Millions, Mom. For all of us. I stand up, feeling a sudden surge of strength. Years of submission, years of giving in, all behind me. At the expense of water that belongs to an entire city? Have you ever wondered what will happen to Rylands when the corporation siphons off every drop? He laughs, a harsh barking sound that doesn't have an ounce of mirth in it. God, you sound like those hippies with the posters. It's business, Mom. Just business. His face suddenly contorts, the mask of calmness falling away. In one motion, he rips the notice to shreds, tosses them at my feet. A paper snowfall of our family's scraps. I have a copy, I say quietly, and the sheriff already has it. Something flickers in his eyes. Not fear, no. Respect, surprise. For a moment, I see him as the little boy I taught to stand up to bullies at school. Then the vision fades. Troy turns around and walks out, leaving behind a void and a buzzing in my ears. My phone rings as I pick up scraps of paper from the floor. Laurel's name is on the screen. Of course, Troy already had time to call her. Mom, what are you doing? Her voice rings with tension. Troy says you're trying to kick them out of the house? Her accusatory tone hurts more than any physical blow. I try to explain. The deed of gift signed the day of the funeral, the rent demands, the letters from the corporation dated before Leroy's death. Wait, Laurel interrupts. Troy was planning this deal while Dad was still alive? No way. There's doubt in her voice, a tiny crack in the wall of distrust. But it's closing fast. Mom, don't you think you're exaggerating a little too much? Her tone changes to cautious, as if she's talking to a child or a mental patient. Grief can make us see conspiracies where there are none. Those words hit you in the butt. My own daughter thinks I'm an old woman out of my mind. The conversation ends with clumsy promises to look into it, hiding a condescending disbelief. The next day, taking advantage of Troy and Cheryl's absence, I go into their room. There are papers on the table. One of them catches my eye, an official paper with the county seal. Supplemental agreement to land title, and the signature, my signature, written out by a hand that tried to imitate my handwriting. A signature on a document dated the day I was at the bank, settling our joint account. Photographing the document with trembling hands. Forging a signature is a felony. My own son has crossed a line beyond which there is no going back. In the evening, Ryland's town hall is like a disturbed beehive. I take a seat in the last row, trying not to attract attention. Troy is against the wall with a corporate representative, both in suits, both with equally fake smiles. The chairman of the board, Harvey Morrison, is banging his gavel calling for order. Jeffrey Hawkins, the Aqua Systems representative, steps forward, the epitome of corporate confidence in a starched shirt. His presentation is a shiny wrapper for a simple message: "We'll take your water and give you a job in return." The plant will create at least 50 jobs for local residents. It sounds like an incantation, like a sacred mantra. 50 jobs in a town where the sawmill and cannery have closed, where young people are leaving in search of a better life. I see my neighbor's eyes light up, their slumped shoulders straighten. When the time comes for questions, I stand up, feeling the eyes on me, full of expectation and hope. I walk to the microphone, feeling the old floorboards creak under my feet, the same floorboards I used to run on as a child when my father took me to town meetings. "Mr. Hawkins, you didn't say how much water you plan to pump daily from our aquifer." His smile faltered for a moment. "Preliminary estimates say we can extract up to 200,000 gallons a day." A whisper passes through the hall. That's not just a number, it's the lifeblood of our city, about to be siphoned off, bottled, and sold. What will happen to the rest of the residents' wells and wells? My voice is quieter, but in the silence it can be heard in the farthest corners of the room. Hawkins begins to talk about minimal impact, about environmental studies, about modern technology. Empty words that hide the truth. They will take our water, and no one knows the consequences. Bill Higgins, owner of an auto repair shop, stands up. His words about jobs, about the future of the city, about his children leaving for Spokane, resonate with the hearts of those present. Martha Jenkins, a teacher, speaks of underfunded schools, of children who have never seen a new computer. One by one, hands are raised. People I've known all my life, neighbors, friends, all talk about jobs, prospects, the future. No one talks about water, about what happens when it's gone. The vote is almost unanimous, preliminary approval of the project. Only 3 are against it: me, Otis, and an old farmer named Edwards, whose lot borders ours. The city has chosen short-term gain over long-term prosperity. In the parking lot, Troy catches up with me. His face glows with triumph. "See, the whole city is in favor of the project." "You can't stop progress." "It's not progress, it's greed," I reply, feeling a wave of bitterness rising inside. "Your little eviction notice doesn't matter now." He smiles the way he used to smile when he was a kid and managed to outsmart his sister. "I have the support of the entire town. And I have proof that you forged my signature on the water rights documents," I say quietly, watching the smile slide off his face. "That's a felony, Troy." A shadow of fear flickers in his eyes, quickly changing to anger. He takes a step toward me, and I see something alien, dangerous in him. "Listen carefully." His voice drops to a whisper. "You're not going to blow this deal. There's too much at stake." "Are you threatening your own mother?" "I'm protecting my children's future." The cold determination of a man willing to do anything is in his eyes. He stares at me for a long moment, then walks away to his car without another word. I'm alone in the dark parking lot, watching their car disappear around the corner, taking with it the last shards of what was once my family. For the first time since this war began, doubt grips me. What if I'm wrong? What if water isn't as important as jobs, like the future of Troy's children, like the economic well-being of the entire city? But then an image comes to mind. Leroy standing knee-deep in mud, his shirt soaked with sweat and his face glowing with happiness. We had just found water on our property, digging a well by hand. "Look, Vinny," he said then, "the cleanest water in the neighborhood, and it's ours. Not for sale, not for exploitation. Ours, as part of the land we've loved and cared for all our lives." The Rylands County Courthouse smells of Polish, paper dust, and stale time. I sit on the front row with Otis, clutching my shabby purse in my hands like a lifeline. Across from me is Troy and his lawyer in a suit that cost more than my monthly pension. Next to them is the Aqua Systems representative, Hawkins, with his used car salesman's perpetually glued on smile. The trial begins, and instead of the expected fear, I feel a strange calmness. It's as if I'm floating above the scene, watching Otis present the evidence as Troy's lawyer makes me look like a greedy old woman determined to win back a favorable deal. Mrs. Stubbins is just trying to get her share when she realized the value of the property. Graves, Troy's lawyer, declares with poorly concealed contempt. Otis jumps up, his normally calm face flushed with color. Objection! This woman spent 30 years delivering mail in the snow and rain to provide an education for her son, who is now forging her signature. Judge Prescott bangs her gavel, but I see a glimmer of something resembling sympathy in her eyes. When the pictures of the forged document appear on the screen, the room falls silent. Troy's face contorts as if he's been punched in the stomach. He whispers something frantically to his lawyer. "Mr. Stubbins," the judge's voice cuts through the silence. "Can you explain why your mother's signature is on a document dated February 10th when bank records show she was in a branch of the First National Bank in Spokane at the time?" Troy stands up. His eyes are a mixture of anger and confusion. "I thought I was helping." His voice sounds unnaturally high. "My mom was in such a state after my dad died." Forging a signature? The judge raises an eyebrow, and there's more accusation in that simple gesture than in any prosecutor's speech. I feel a cold satisfaction growing inside. Not joy, no. It died along with my trust in my son. Just satisfaction that the truth has finally come out. Judge Prescott examines the documents with the methodicality of a surgeon dissecting a corpse. Every time she turns a page, I see Troy's shoulders tense more and more. Her verdict sounds like a breath of fresh air after a long stay in a musty basement. The supplemental water rights agreement is invalid. As for the deed of gift on the house, given the circumstances of its signing, I'm suspending it pending further investigation. Otis squeezes my shoulder. A victory, however temporary. A first step toward justice. But the joy is short-lived. Hawkins rises from his seat, a predator sensing a threat to its prey. "Your Honor, Aqua Systems is a third party in this case. We entered into a contract with Mr. Stubbins based on the documents provided. We acted in good faith and have already made a substantial investment. We want to file a counterclaim to protect our rights." The judge frowns. "Go ahead. In the meantime, I forbid any work on the disputed site until the final decision." We leave the courthouse in a drizzle. Typical April weather, as if the sky itself were mourning the breakup of our family. Troy and his lawyer hurriedly leave without a word. Hawkins stays, talking on the phone with such fury that I'm almost certain his phone is going to crack. "The first step has been taken," Otis says, opening the umbrella over both of us. "But there's still a long way to go." "Do you think corporate knew about the paperwork problems?" I ask, glancing at Hawkins, who gestures as if he's conducting an invisible orchestra of anger. "These companies always do their due diligence," Otis hums. "They must have known and decided to take a chance. Or," he doesn't finish the sentence. "Or what? Or they have connections where they need them." His voice drops to a barely audible whisper. "Be careful, Winnie. There's a lot of money involved. There's a surprise waiting for me at home, an unfamiliar car with Oregon plates." My heart's pounding. Laurel? Is she really here? I hear voices in the kitchen. I take a deep breath and walk toward the sound like a minefield. Laurel is sitting at the table, a cup of coffee in front of her. Across from her is Cheryl, their heads almost touching in a trusting tilt of accomplice. At my appearance, they straighten abruptly, like schoolgirls caught smoking in the restroom. Mom! Laurel stands up and wraps her arms around me. Her hug is cold, formal. How'd the trial go? The judge is on my side, I answer, trying not to look at Cheryl. She invalidated the document with the forged signature and suspended the deed of gift. Cheryl snorts and stands up. I'm gonna go, she tosses to Laurel. Call me when you're done. She walks out without even giving me a glance. Laurel and I are alone in the kitchen, soaked with the smell of coffee and innuendo. When did you get here? I ask, taking off my coat. A couple hours ago. Laurel sits down at the table again. I decided I needed to be here. This is too serious for a phone call. I nod and put the kettle on. Years of ritual when you don't know what to say. Have you seen Troy yet? No, just Cheryl. Laurel drummed her fingers on the table, a habit from childhood when she was nervous. Mom, I have to ask you straight out. Do you realize what you're doing? This trial, all these charges, it's destroying the family. I look at my daughter and I see a stranger in her. When did the sweet girl who used to pick berries with me and read poetry out loud turn into this cold woman with a calculating gaze? It's not judgment that destroys a family, Laurel. It's lies, betrayal, and greed. Laurel sighs, as if she's tired of explaining the obvious to a child. Look, I'm not condoning what Troy did. Forging a signature is really over the top. But maybe there's a way to resolve this without further scandal. The kettle's starting to whistle. I turn away from the stove to hide the bitterness in my eyes. What do you suggest? Aqua Systems is willing to compromise, Laurel says as casually as if she were discussing the purchase of new curtains. They'll include you in the contract. $250,000 plus annual royalties. I turn to her, the teapot in my hand feeling heavy. So you're not here to support me? You're here to talk me into accepting the money and shutting up. Mom, I'm trying to find a solution that will satisfy everyone, she said, her voice sounding irritated. $250,000 is a lot of money. You could buy a new house, travel, live worry-free. But what about the water? What about the city? The city voted in favor of the project. She's clearly running out of patience. People want jobs, and besides, the environmental risks are probably exaggerated. I look at my daughter and I don't recognize her. When did she become so cynical? So indifferent to the land she grew up on? This isn't about money, Laurel. It's about principle. It's about trust. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. Laurel stands up abruptly, her chair creaking on the tile floor. God, Mom, you were always so stubborn. At least Dad knew how to negotiate with you. Don't you think he would have taken the deal for the grandchildren? Mentioning Leroy stabs me like a knife. Don't you dare say what your father would have done. My voice low, almost threatening. You didn't know him at all if you think he'd sell water to a corporation. Laurel looks at me for a long moment. You know what? Cheryl's right. You've been insufferable since Dad died, always looking for enemies, suspicious of everyone. Maybe you should, talk to someone? Professionally? That's it. They've decided to declare me crazy. Do you think I'm out of my mind? I ask quietly. Not crazy, Laurel replies quickly. Just traumatized. Grief can distort my perception of reality. Like making me see a forged signature, which the judge ruled as fact today. Laurel silently packs her bag. I'll stop at a motel, she says dryly. We both need to cool off. She leaves without giving me a goodbye hug. The front door slams, and the emptiness of the house becomes almost palpable. The next day, the town turns into a battlefield. At the grocery store, Martha Jenkins defiantly crosses the aisle when she sees me. Doris, the cashier, silently rifles through her purchases. Everyone says you're trying to derail a project that would save our town, she says without looking at me. My Jack could have gotten a job at that plant. He's been out of work for 3 months. I walk out with a heavy heart. I run into Bill Higgins on the street. Winnie, you've got to realize what you're doing. His voice lacks its usual warmth. This project is a chance for Rylands, and you're stalling. Troy forged my signature, Bill. He lied to me. Maybe he made a mistake, Bill shrugs, but his intentions were good for the whole town. What's going to happen to the water? To our wells? The experts say the impact will be minimal. He looks at me with ill-concealed pity. You know, people say you've changed since Leroy died. You've become, out of sorts. I nod and walk on, clutching the grocery bag to my white knuckles. I can feel the stairs all the way home. I hear whispers behind me. At home, I turn on the radio and hear the local station broadcast the news. The Rylands Mineral Water Plant project is in jeopardy because of a family dispute. Winfred Stubbins, widow of Leroy Stubbins, is suing her own son in an attempt to overturn a gift. Troy Stubbins claims his mother suffers from post-traumatic stress syndrome after her husband's death and is inadequate in her perception of the situation. I turn off the radio, unable to listen any further. Troy acts fast, turns me from victim to perpetrator. The phone rings. It's Otis. Winnie, did you hear? Troy gave an interview to the paper. He said after Leroy died, you got suspicious, started hiding things, forgetting things. Says you once got lost in your own neighborhood. That's a lie, I exclaim. Nothing like that ever happened. I know, but people believe it, especially when Cheryl and even Laurel backs up what he says. Laurel? My voice is shaking. Is she in on this too? The paper quotes her saying you've been out of sorts these past few months and that she's very concerned about your condition. I close my eyes, feeling the ground go from under my feet. The betrayal was deeper than I thought. My own daughter has teamed up with Troy against me. What do we do, Otis? Keep fighting. His voice is as firm as a rock in a stormy sea. We have facts, evidence. The judge is on our side. I've aged 10 years in the last 2 months. My hair has turned completely gray. Wrinkles have cut deeper into my skin. Every morning I see in the mirror the look of a tired woman who can't accept that her own son betrayed her. Otis squeezes my hand reassuringly. He too has changed in the weeks since, gaunt and dull in his eyes. But the determination in his eyes remains the same. We've come a long way, and today we must find out if it was in vain. This session will not last long. Troy's attorney presents the appeal with new documents, evidence, expert testimony. Aqua Systems lawyers add their arguments, citing the prior agreement and the costs incurred by the company. Otis responds, pointing to signature forgery, to pressure, to the violation of my rights. But I see in the judge's eyes what I've noticed many times over the months: tiredness of other people's family squabbles. For her, it's just another real estate case, another line in her daily schedule. The human drama behind the legal language doesn't interest her. The ruling is swift, almost indifferent. A technical victory for Troy. The deed of gift is recognized as valid, despite the circumstances of its signing. The supplemental water agreement, where my signature was forged, is canceled, but it doesn't matter. The company has entered into a new contract directly with Troy as the legal owner of the land. The only concession is that I'm entitled to $50,000 in compensation, a quarter of the market value of the house Leroy and I built with our own hands, 1/5 of what Troy will get from the corporation. We leave the courtroom in silence. Otis can't find words of comfort, and we don't need them. We both know we've lost not only the trial, but the very possibility of justice. I'm sorry, Winnie, he finally says, as we walked down the wide steps. I thought the law was on our side. You did the best you could, I reply, looking at my hands. Hands that planted apple trees in an orchard that now belongs to strangers. Troy walks past us without looking in my direction. His lawyer explains something animatedly, waving his arms. They get into a shiny new car and drive away without looking back. For the first time in all this time, I feel strangely relieved. It's over. No more fighting, no more proving, no more hoping. Now I'm free. From illusions, from false expectations, from a family that was never really my family. 2 weeks later, the house sells. I have 3 days to pack. I pack only the essentials: clothes, a few photographs, Leroy's ring, his letters. Everything else stays: furniture, dishes, books. Troy generously lets me take my personal effects, but I can see the impatience in his eyes. He can't wait to get rid of me, to erase the last traces of the past. Cheryl watches me packing with ill-concealed satisfaction. She's already planning renovations, new furniture, new curtains. The kids stay away. Marshall doesn't show up at all, and Paige walks by like I'm a ghost. On the second day, Laurel arrives. She looks embarrassed, almost guilty. She helps me put things away, talks about all sorts of things, avoiding the main topic. Finally, over a cup of tea in the soon-to-be stranger's kitchen, she makes up her mind. Mom, I was thinking, maybe you'd move to Portland with me. I look at her in surprise. After everything that's happened, after her testimony in court, after supporting Troy's lies, the suggestion seems like a mockery. Why, Laurel? She averts her gaze, rubbing the edge of her napkin. Well, I have a big house. There's a spare room, and the kids need a grandmother. Jesse's about to start school, and Amy just turned 4. I work full-time. Babysitting's expensive. That's it. She doesn't need a mother. She needs a free nanny. Saves money on childcare. Another deal, another use. Thank you, but no, I'm not, I say calmly. I've already found a place. That's true. A small apartment in Greenfield, a town about 30 miles from Rylands. Cheap, cramped 4th floor, no elevator, but my own. A place where no one will tell me how to live my life. Laurel looks both disappointed and relieved. Are you sure? At your age, living alone. At my age, I interrupt her, it's better to be alone than with people who only see you as a tool for their own purposes. She flinches but doesn't argue. Maybe deep down she realizes I'm right. I walk around the house on my last day, saying goodbye to every room, every corner that holds a piece of my life. This is where Troy took his first steps. This is where Laurel read her first poems. Here, Leroy celebrated his 60th birthday, a week before he came down with the illness that eventually took him. In the orchard, I stop at an old apple tree. We planted it the year we were married, and it grew with our family. I touch the rough bark as if it were the hand of an old friend. Goodbye, I whisper, and tears finally break through, washing away months of held-back pain. The move to Greenfield goes off without pomp. Otis helps with the boxes, the only one who stays by my side until the end. My new apartment is tiny, but clean. The windows overlook the park, and it's a small consolation to see trees instead of concrete walls. A month goes by. I get a job at the local library, 3 days a week, sorting books and helping visitors. The work is quiet, almost meditative. It gives structure to days that would otherwise dissolve into monotony. I haven't heard from Troy, and I don't expect to. Laurel calls once every 2 weeks. The conversation's short, awkward. She doesn't apologize for betraying me, and I don't demand an apology. We're like strangers who happen to be on the same phone line. And then the news from Ryland starts coming in. First from Otis, then from former neighbors I keep in touch with. Aqua Systems got the plant up and running in record time. Drilling, piping, industrial pumps, round the clock work pumping precious water out of the ground, and almost immediately, the first problems. Wells on the southern outskirts of the city begin to dry up. The water in the creek that runs through the center of Rylands is getting murky. People complain of a strange taste coming out of the tap. The company denies blame. They talk about natural causes, dry summers, cyclical changes in the aquifer. They promise to conduct research, install filters, solve the problem. But the problem only gets worse. The water level in the wells is dropping lower and lower. The city council convenes for an emergency meeting. The mayor calls in the state environmental agency. I read about this in the local paper with no triumph, only bitterness that my righteousness has turned into disaster for an entire city. For people who have turned their backs on me but are still my neighbors, part of my life. One evening, there's a knock on the door. A mailman stands on the doorstep with an envelope requiring a personal signature. It's from Rylands, but it's not from Otis. The handwriting on the envelope is unfamiliar, childlike. I open the envelope with growing anxiety. Inside is a folded piece of paper, written in neat handwriting. A letter from Paige, my granddaughter. Dear Grandma, she writes, I hope you are doing well. We've had so much going on. Daddy and Mommy are fighting a lot about money. The company is behind on payments, and Dad's car dealership is almost closed, and we're having trouble with the water. It smells funny, and they're bringing us bottles. Daddy's always angry and says bad words. I was wondering if you could lend me some money. I really need it. My cell phone broke, and a new one costs $500. Everyone at school laughs that I have an old model. I'll pay you back when Daddy's business gets better. P.S. Don't tell your parents I texted. They don't know. I sit with the letter in my hands, feeling a wave of emotion rise up inside. Not anger, not resentment, but a deep, all-consuming weariness. Paige, who never said a word to me goodbye, who looked at me as an enemy, is now asking for money. Not to visit me, not to apologize, but to buy a new phone. And suddenly, I realize with piercing clarity, I haven't just lost my home, I've lost my family, or rather, the illusion of family that I had cherished for so long. Troy was always selfish, always putting his own interests above everything else. Laurel always stayed out of the way, taking the easy way out. And the grandchildren. They're just children raised in an atmosphere of consumerism and indifference. I never had a real family. There was only Leroy, who loved me for who I was. And he's gone. Slowly, I tear the letter into small pieces. Each scrap is like a piece of an old life that it's time to give up. I gather the scraps into an envelope and throw them in the trash, like a symbolic burial of the past. The next morning, I go to the bus station. I buy a one-way ticket to Seattle. I don't leave a note. I don't call anyone to say goodbye. I just get on the bus and watch Greenfield disappear out the window. I don't know what awaits me in Seattle. I have no plan, no goal, just 50,000 in a bank account, 2 duffel bags, and the freedom to decide my own fate. Maybe I'll get an apartment overlooking the ocean. Maybe I'll get a job at a bookstore. Maybe I'll sign up for a photography class. Leroy always said I had a good eye. The bus picks up speed, taking me farther and farther away from the past. Trees, fields, small towns flash by the window. I don't feel triumph or joy, only a quiet, calm acceptance. I've lost the home I loved, lost the family I believed in, but I found something more precious, myself, a woman who wasn't afraid to fight for the truth, who didn't sell out for money and comfort, who kept her dignity when everything around her was falling apart. And maybe that's enough. Maybe at 68, it's not too late to start life again, on your own terms, without expectations, without illusions, without bitterness,